contemplate for a while.
What's up, everybody? We are live on the Security Squawk podcast. Welcome to the show. I am your co-host, Brian Horning, over at Exact IT. We got Ryan O'Hara from Think Cybersecurity, ArcSolver CEO, Mr. Reginald Andre, and Tech Rescue CEO, Randy Bryan. What's up, gentlemen? Welcome to another show, and we're going live today. So, Randy, I won't be watching the private chat. I'll be watching the comments section.
Real live, not fake live.
Oh, it's all good. We chat about you, so you don't need to watch the private.
Oh, I know. I can see it afterwards. So, today we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff to help you understand how cybersecurity, cyber criminals, ransomware affect your business and affect your lives. All that we ask in return is that you share our show, share it with your friends and family, share our podcast on the various podcast platforms. But today we are coming to you live on most social media platforms. I think I got us going on Facebook, YouTube. We also are on LinkedIn right now. I think that's it. Yeah, just share wherever you see us. You can share this post. You can share our podcast, and why we do this and ask you to share it is because A, we volunteer our time and our expertise to bring this to you, and B, I don't run ads, I don't run boring commercials, I don't stop the show and tell you about some product or service. We just talk shop and let you know the goods. So anything you guys want to add to that before we kind of run through the topics for today? Yeah, rate us a 5-star in the Google Podcast and the Apple Podcast too. So helps us out.
Free as in free beer.
Yeah, if you don't understand like why we ask you to do that, because the more you like our stuff and the more you comment on our stuff and share it out, the more the algorithms look at that and say, okay, I'm going to show this to other people kind of like organically, right? So,
and it's not for us; it's to get the word out and help other people. So
yeah, we're not trying to make any money off this, like, you know. So we got a major cyber attack on hospital chains. We have Microsoft Exchange Server being totally exploited left and right by every major hacking group out there. So we're going to get into a little bit of a discussion about just Microsoft Exchange in general, and is it time to move on from hosting your own email servers? We're also going to talk about some hardware vendors who've had some issues lately and why that could have major implications for cyber defenders and people trying to keep their network secure down the road. There's some cloud services out there that are making hacking easier, and we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about some minor cyber attacks. While they may seem like nuisances, we're going to kind of make you aware of some of the impacts that these kinds of things have on, you know, your individual lives or your business. Even minor cyber attacks can cause major disruptions, or what appear to be minor cyber attacks can cause major disruptions for your business and major problems. And we want to make you aware of these things. So first thing we're going to jump into, we got this major hospital chain that has a ton of hospitals across the country. It seems like, from what I can read in the article that I have in front of me, most of these hospitals are in Nebraska, Iowa, Washington, Texas, and Tennessee, at least the ones that were affected. So the name of the hospital conglomerate is Common Spirit Health, which operates more than 700 healthcare sites in over 20 states. And said in a statement on October 4th that it was managing an IT security issue, which here we go again. Obviously, the breach attorneys are involved when you see stuff like that. I mean, literally, we're hearing constantly about there's an IT security issue or an IT issue that somebody's dealing with. and we're not consistently now, we're not getting the information that it's ransomware for weeks and months later. If you guys remember on the show, we talked about Ferrari. I think it was last week or the week before. They're still denying that they were hit with ransomware, even though the ransomware group is on the dark web releasing Ferrari data. So, it's only a matter of time before Ferrari is going to have to come out and admit that, they were hit with ransomware. We know the group that hit them, but they're still denying it left and right. And I think that that's kind of what we're going to see in the future here is, again, we're going back into this mode of not sharing information, not letting people know what's happening. And I think that's the wrong move. I think it's a major misstep by the cybersecurity community to behave in this manner.
Yeah, we've talked about trying to destigmatize this for several shows, and we're going in the exact opposite direction now. We're just flat out denying it and pretending it didn't happen.
Yeah, well, I think it's, again, we talk about this kind of, as in our business groups that we're all in together. We're in a situation where we're not in control, meaning the IT people, the cybersecurity people, when it comes to these incidents a lot, and that's mainly because of cyber insurance. And I try to stress this to as many people as possible. You are no longer in control when you file a cyber insurance claim. The insurance company is in control, and the attorney that they assign to your claim is in control. And I think that that's all a result of those two entities, insurance and lawyers, running the show on this stuff. They don't see things the way that we see them. I don't know what the right answer is. I just know that in my experience with dealing with cybersecurity, kind of on, I guess, in the underground level, as you would call it, right? When you're dealing with other people that work in this business, when we're talking in back channels and, sharing information with one another, it makes things a lot easier. And it makes my show a lot easier when I have, meat on the bone to talk about things. When I don't have meat on the bone, we can just speculate based on, repeated behavior patterns that we see coming out of all these attacks. And here we go with, basically them not admitting that they are dealing with a ransomware incident, even though we know that they're dealing with a ransomware incident.
Which is even worse than it was before, because before they were at least admitting that they were dealing with something and they weren't, divulging any details about what it was or anything like that. Now we're getting to a point where they're just claiming that it's not actually happening.
Anytime you get lawyers involved, they're also thinking about the future and what's going to happen for future repercussions as far as lawsuits and things like that. So I really think that they need to open up, because this is life and death. This is people that have surgeries and have appointments. And if they're in some rural area and this is the only hospital in that area, this can really be impacting people.
And they even mentioned that in the story. They could not do a CT scan on a patient with a brain bleed because of this.
So it's also pointing out that research is starting to show that hospitals under strain from cyber attacks like the one at Common Spirit Health have a higher death rate than places not suffering attacks, which is like, how are they correlating that data?
If you click through, there's another article about it. A giant research was done, and the more ransomware attacks there are at a hospital, the higher the death rate. Now, it might be one of those things like there's a correlation between flossing and heart disease. And it might be one of those things that people that floss also are more likely to walk or run or go to the gym or something like that. And that might be the case here. Like, it may not literally be that ransomware leads literally directly to higher death rates. It may be that lackadaisical hospitals that overall have lackadaisical policies and processes and don't take care of their cybersecurity have higher death rates, which that would be even worse. So moral of the story is, if your hospital near you had a ransomware, you may want to choose the next hospital over to do something that is somewhat risky. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense to me. I mean, how you do one thing is how you do everything, right? So if you're skimping on cybersecurity or not doing things good around cybersecurity, you're probably not doing things good around your operations in general. That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, but even these, nurses and doctors, they're already overstressed, and now you're telling them that they can't use their electronic tools and have to go back to paper and pen and faxing and things like that, mistakes are going to happen so easily that way.
Yep.
And realistically, this story is kind of a copy and paste. I mean, we've probably done a story like this once every month for the last 6 months. You just substitute the name of the healthcare facility, and the rest of it's pretty much the same. This keeps happening.
I mean, like 100%. The thing that I'm always looking at is like K through 12 schools, colleges, and hospitals. I mean, you have a massive target on your back. And the other problem is the way I look at it is these are types of institutions or businesses that can't hide like certain other businesses can hide. Like even a big accounting firm, if their clients don't, run to social media or kind of mention to somebody that, their accounting firm or their accountant is, offline because of a cyber attack, probably not going to make the news. But when you have the general public can walk into a place and can see that there's something going on, like things are not normal, colleges, schools, hospitals, they're going to have a really hard time keeping this under wraps to where they don't have to say something. And I think that's what we're seeing here with a lot of the information that we're looking at in the news is, the information that's getting out there is being very controlled. But these are one of those entities where they just have to start saying something because people are walking in trying to get treatment and they can't get it. The same thing if you walk into a school and they can't provide you educational services. It's going to be very evident. It's going to be in your face, and people are going to start saying like, hey, my school can't operate right now. And you don't really have much control of that. So you guys have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I just agree. You're right on. It's very true.
An article even says here, I didn't even see it. It's not unusual for hospitals facing ransomware attack to stay tight-lipped about attacks. It's not unusual now, but it was unusual 2 years ago. I mean, remember the UHS attack? And I remember them changing their statement on their website 4 or 5 times. But the very first one they put out was very blatant and very matter of fact, like we're dealing with ransomware at all of our facilities. And that's kind of what this article is pointing out. Is like now things are tight-lipped. It's hard to get information, and I think these reporters are probably realizing it's harder to get information. The healthcare sector has been reluctant to acknowledge a relationship between cyber attacks and patient health. It's only in the last year or so that these conversations bubbled to the surface, but as cyber attacks on hospitals and healthcare organizations become more and more frequent, the issue becomes impossible to ignore. So the conversation is going in an interesting direction, and I believe there is a correlation between companies being tight-lipped about things and then reporters then digging deeper into hospitals' operations. And, like I said, how you do one thing is how you do everything. So you're looking at the potential here of investigative journalists doing these investigative reporting on hospitals and them coming out with a bigger black eye or 2 black eyes, because not only do they suck at cybersecurity, but they also suck as a hospital. And, you probably shouldn't go there if your life is on the line, right? As Randy said, like go somewhere else. So anything you guys want to add to that? I mean, huge deal. I don't think hospitals are going to slow down anytime soon when it comes to this stuff.
Especially not if they're not sharing information.
Yeah. So it's brutal. So,
well, and also the trend. So like 3, 4, 5 years ago, like you paid the ransom and, you didn't really expect to get re-hit so much, but I know there's always been a statistic. If you paid the ransom, you are going to get hit. Well, now that number has gotten so high, it's almost guaranteed. If these guys pay the ransom, they're going to turn around and get hit right away. I've been reading lately about the bad actors. They're maybe they don't come right back, but then they sell access to someone else who comes right back and hits them. And that's going through the roof now. So this is just a big mess.
Which goes back to was the response done properly in the first place? Or is the attackers just sitting there waiting for the storm to blow over and then they do it all over again without having to do a whole lot of work?
I'm thinking they're just paying the ransom and thinking that's good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Andre, you've been quiet about this subject. Anything you
No,
want to add?
I just worry about what's going to happen in 6 months when there's another article on a Sunday morning saying that that ransomware that happened, now everybody's data is exposed, everybody's personal records are exposed. So
Yep, 100%. So we're gonna move on here. Not a ton of cyber or ransomware attacks that we're hearing about this week. Although I do know quite a few that are dealing with something and it's just not in the news yet, and I'm not sure why. Microsoft is again investigating a report of a new zero-day bug abused to hacked Exchange servers. And this group, Lockbit, which we've talked about before, is a very prolific ransomware group. They are using these vulnerabilities in Microsoft Exchange servers to take over, get admin access to networks, and ultimately do things like deploy ransomware. And we want to talk about this for a little bit because I think a lot of companies, especially mid-market companies, are still managing their own Exchange servers and still kind of haven't adopted the cloud yet, so to speak. And it's really, important for us to highlight, the vulnerability and the risk that you're taking by running your own Exchange servers in 2022. So I guess let's kind of talk about first, like, what's changed, okay? Because, 10 years ago, everybody had their own Exchange server. From small businesses all the way up to enterprises. Exchange admins were in high demand. So what's changed in the last 7 or 10 years to where we've gotten to this point where Microsoft Exchange servers are constantly being exploited and hacked? I can think of a couple incidents that happened, but go ahead.
We've talked about this a million times. We talked about it in the green room. I personally think the main issue was the SolarWinds hack. It goes back to that because a bad actor was able to insert just like this much code into the source code for one of SolarWinds products, a cybersecurity product or a backup product. I don't remember which one it was, but then that got compiled, signed, got rolled out. It went to major cybersecurity companies. It went to defense departments, and it went to Microsoft. And they were able, from the back door, from the inside, they were able, it appears, to leak all kinds of source code for Exchange. That's why whenever we mention this, I almost break my neck shaking my head. I used to be like a big fan of, if you want to run Exchange, that's cool. I prefer the cloud, but now it's like, you're dumb if you're still running it because the source code's been leaked and they're going to find stuff. They're going to keep finding stuff till the end of the world, until Microsoft rewrites from scratch. This is going to be a problem.
And this particular one, so this is another example of a copy and paste article. We've done this topic several times in the last couple of months as well. But this particular article, the vulnerability that it's talking about is still an undisclosed zero-day vulnerability. So they don't even know what the vulnerability is that's being exploited, on top of the fact that they're still working on 2 other vulnerabilities that they don't have patched. So this is now potentially 3 exposed zero-day vulnerabilities that are on this particular platform.
So do you think it's just more Microsoft not having the resources or as much resources compared to their Office 365 platforms? And that's why this is, a 0-day and they can't fix it fast enough?
A lot of it, I think, has to do with the fact that the same reason that we're seeing so many more vulnerabilities these days is code has gotten so exponentially complicated. So trying to patch these vulnerabilities without breaking the point of the software in the first place. Look at the print nightmare vulnerability from last year. That took them, a good couple of months to fix that. And their initial recommendation was turn off the print spooler. Which if you have to print, which most businesses do, that's not really a good solution. So, they couldn't find a way initially to fix the problem without breaking the thing that it was supposed to do in the first place. So it does get complicated. And to that point, though, I do think that Microsoft also, would prefer people move to the cloud. At this point, it's not really a matter of why are you just do it, just move. What's holding you back? What reasons can you have for wanting to stick with an on-premises Exchange server, as opposed to moving to the cloud at this point? And I don't know the answer to that.
It's been a
I can picture an old school, IT guy that still doesn't trust the cloud, or something like that, or maybe if it is these large enterprises, maybe the migration itself, the cost, maybe that's something that's holding them back.
Yeah.
As well.
It's been a real thing for 365 though.
And this is causing, everything you guys mentioned is spot on, but like from a CEO of a company standpoint, it's not easy to wrap your head around this, right? Because you've had Exchange servers in your business for 20 years, and now we're basically saying, this legit software program probably will, in today's day and age, cause a problem for you, if not soon in the future. And how do you, if you don't understand this stuff, how do you go from, this is how we always did things, to the new world that we live in, which is like basically, I don't know. I kind of look at it as like, you got to do everything to erase yourself from the internet. And what I mean by that is kind of like a zero trust approach. Like, does somebody in Europe, does somebody in Asia, does somebody in Africa really need to see or get access to or see that my IP address, my publicly facing IP address, is out there and is, has something behind it? And I think that's where we're getting to, is like, you really have to control what on the internet can look at your systems. But by design, Exchange servers basically need to be open to everything, in order to receive email from the various places it can be getting it from. So, in one sense, I agree with you guys. And I don't know if that's what you said, but I kind of feel like this is a move by Microsoft to force everybody into their cloud. Like, eventually they're going to say, like, this thing's so screwed up that we're not even going to develop it anymore. We're sunsetting it, and everybody's going to run Exchange online. Now, I don't know, and I don't want to talk about this too long, but it does bring up the question in my mind. What's the difference between an on-prem Exchange server and M365's code base?
My question is as well.
Like,
I'm sure that there's some overlap.
Yep.
To me, I would suspect the biggest difference is Microsoft managing the infrastructure versus an IT department managing it.
We see this all the time. Day in Exchange, why would it be any different?
Exactly.
In
If they share the
M365?
code. Yep.
Well, look at Kaseya as an example from last year, right? They had the same vulnerability in their cloud platform, but they were able to shut it down and mitigate it right away. Whereas there was a slowdown and a lag from the people who were trying to manage it, whether it was, further behind and unpatched, for, other issues down the road, but they were able to get the cloud infrastructure corrected pretty quickly. I mean, they still took it down as a precaution, but I don't know if that's maybe a similar issue here.
I mean, the only thing I'll give you is that I would guarantee that Microsoft has more people on the front lines monitoring, like things like massive brute force password attacks, things like that, and they'll shut it down and they'll shut that traffic down, and they have the ability to do so, where most businesses don't have that ability. Right? They're not going to have the ability to sit there and monitor and shut down traffic, and Microsoft has a lot more control over internet servers that route traffic than any business will. I mean, very few businesses have that capability and leverage. So that's the one thing I'll say, okay, that I'll give them that. They're probably safer from that standpoint, but I'm just trying to think this through logically and say, well, if an Exchange server has a vulnerability and they don't know how to patch it and it is a 0 day, how does that not exist over here as well?
Yeah, that's a huge concern I have too, as well, man. How much of that code is shared? Are they using libraries for certain functions that are shared? Did they rewrite the code? And I don't, for me, it gives me no relief at all to think Microsoft's handling the infrastructure. If those vulnerabilities are there in their code and they're handling the infrastructure, that gives me no relief at all. I mean, they're going to figure out a way around Microsoft's infrastructure. So I don't know, man.
So just to kind of give people illustrate what this looks like, in one incident in July of 2022, cyber criminals used a previously deployed web shell on a compromised Exchange server. And that's just fancy for saying they put this like lightweight application in place to compromise the Exchange server. And then they basically gave themselves admin privileges just simply by doing this simple thing. The scary part about this is once this stuff is known, you don't have to be a very good criminal hacker. Like, you need to be a really good criminal hacker to figure out there's a 0 day, right? But and let's say that's 1% of the world that can figure that out, right? 1% of the cyber criminal community that can figure out how to exploit this. Once that's in the public, that other 99% can now use this to exploit, right? They might not be smart enough to figure it out, but they can figure out how to use the tools to exploit what somebody else figured out. And that's the dangerous part of cybersecurity and cyber criminals. So they ended up stealing 1.3 terabytes of data and encrypted the entire network. And they basically took the threat actors 1 week to hijack the Active Directory admin account from when the web shell was uploaded. So they put this web shell on the Exchange server, and within a week, they were able to basically take over the admin account for the network and then do whatever they wanted. Anything else you guys want to add to this? I mean, it's pretty.
To add to that, Brian, a little bit. So that's the vulnerabilities that we're aware of.
Right.
For every vulnerability that we're aware of, there's probably 10 more that those hackers are holding on to and keeping quiet about, keeping to themselves and waiting for the right moment to use them. Because as soon as they start using them, that's when people can start seeing, how are they exploiting this and figuring out what that vulnerability is to patch it. So those undisclosed vulnerabilities that haven't been used in the wild yet are super valuable in that community.
Yeah, because the article even points out that the Exchange servers were likely hacked using an undisclosed 0 day, given that the victims received technical support from Microsoft to deploy quarterly security patches after a previous compromise from December of 2021. So this company was compromised in December of 2021. They got help from Microsoft to deploy patches, and then in July 2022, 6 months later, 7 months later, they got hit again. And if you look at the timeline here, those patches were released around May. So Microsoft helped them in May get their Exchange server patched. So technically they were no longer vulnerable, and then something happened in July. So these guys have a 0 day on their hands that Microsoft has no clue about. I'm sure they're doing backwards forensics and reverse engineering to figure out what it is now that they know this. But yeah, I mean, I guess the moral of the story here for me, guys, is don't anything that you have connected. Like, number one, if you're a business person, a CEO is as minute and as this is going to sound in terms of details, you should fully understand every device that you have that's facing the internet. Like, you should know what they are. Because the reason I point this out is because there's so many times that I hear that companies didn't realize that somebody opened up like a remote desktop port, so somebody could remote into their computer because they were working from home, or they, wanted remote access, or they were going on vacation. And you're like, and I know a lot of people listening to this right now probably are like, well, that's stupid. Like, who would do that? Like, we know not to open RDP up to the internet. It still happens all the time. Because people think, oh, I won't get attacked if I do this for even like just, the 2 weeks while I'm away. It happens all the time. And people need to understand like what in the world they have connected to the rest of the world, so they know what their threat is. So somebody should be telling the CEO on a quarterly basis, here are all the things that are facing the internet from your IP address or from your offices. And going over with the CEO, not just the IT director, so the CEO knows, like, this is his risk. This is what he has out there. Here's how he could potentially be hacked. So we have a couple questions. I don't know if you guys are ready for questions yet.
Wow.
So
Questions are fun.
we'll keep this one here because Steven wants to know at this point, are there any advantages to using an on-site Exchange server over the cloud?
I mean, what there used to be was that you pay one price for the license and you can have, hundreds of mailboxes and not incur a bunch of extra cost. Whereas the cloud, you're going to get charged per user basically. So that was an advantage. But times have changed. So I think we're all going to shake our heads and say, we don't see it. I mean, what do you guys think?
I can't think of any advantage.
Yeah, and even to migrate from Exchange server, there's tons of tools and services to move mailboxes, calendars. There was always that, like, what happens if I transfer things? Am I going to lose things? But nowadays it's automated.
I think a lot of people tend to fall back on the, if it's on premises, then it's in my control and I can handle it. I don't trust Microsoft. So kind of like what Randy was saying, but at the same time, look at the data. I mean, when these types of things happen and there's a cloud environment and an on-premise environment, pretty much every time it's that on-premises environment that has been most impacted, because as much as you think you can keep up with these things, depending on the size of your organization, you probably can't, or you probably aren't.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I would just add that, if you think you're saving money by doing this internally, hopefully the things that we've described today at least make you realize that you have risk, and with that risk could come a bigger price tag.
Yeah, exactly.
On the other side of it. So you're not really saving any money. And the other thing is to secure this stuff and monitor this stuff and have things in place so that you're not under attack on your Exchange server requires just more than one IT person running that server. You probably want to have like a security operations center that's monitoring that thing 24/7, so they can detect things like when somebody puts a shell on your Exchange server. That's one of the things I'll point out with this article. Had they had a security operations center in place, somebody would have detected that got put on there when it got put on there, and they wouldn't have had a week to take over an Active Directory account and get admin access. So, the more things that you're going to do to have in-house, in my opinion, the way you got to look at it is the more things you have to do yourself around security. If you don't have a security operations center in place and you're running any type of server in your business, you have massive risk in your business. That's my opinion. So,
yeah, I mean, you mentioned the cost savings versus the risk. Like, literally, I quote your granddad, Brian, like literally every day. The cheap man pays the most.
Spends.
What's that? Am I not quoting it right?
Cheap man spends the most.
Oh yeah, cheap man spends the most, and that's the truth here, man. If you're trying to do the Exchange server to save money, it's going to end up costing you so much more money in the long run. Like right now, we need to run away from this as fast as we can.
All right, so we got a bunch of questions here, guys. Thank you for everyone for throwing these in here and giving us more stuff to talk about. But what is the first step in mitigating a 0-day attack? Interesting, because I'm sure we probably have 4 different opinions on this, or we can give 4 different points of view. Ryan, what do you think?
Getting an expert involved in incident response. I mean, if you're already in the midst of a 0-day attack, if you're not trained in this stuff, don't assume that you can get in there and fix it yourself. You need to get the experts involved right away. Find somebody, or better yet, have somebody on standby before an attack that you can reach out and contact right away, who's experienced in this and can jump in and do what needs to be done.
I would say from an IT perspective, from a cybersecurity perspective, live your life like you are in the middle of a 0-day attack. And if you will do that, then you will segment everything. You'll put passwords over here and, multi-factor codes over here. And this guest network segmented from that guest network. That way, when there is a 0-day attack on one of the sections of your business, you have it so segmented they can't just get in there and run freely and get into everything. That's what I would say is, start off by living your life like assuming that they're already in your network.
Yeah. And for me, so with a 0-day attack, there's nothing you can do about it because that it's out of your control, but you can certainly have tools in place to help detect and prevent it. So for me, detect and prevent would be the things that you need to have in place prior to, so that you can be aware or something can ring a bell to say, hey, something is weird going on here.
Yep. And just like, I'm going to go back to what I said, and that's just approach everything kind of like what Randy said with the zero trust mindset, that you can't look at things as like, I can just put something out on the internet and it doesn't matter who can see it, who can get to it. It matters now. There's too many tools out there where hackers can find you. Yes, there's millions and millions of IP addresses out there, but there are tools and bots that can scan these IP addresses and quickly, report back to somebody, this is what's behind this IP address, or this is what's on this IP address. And you just have to look at things from a standpoint of what are we exposing these devices to? And, how do we make sure that, you protect them, right? And that's, talking about publicly facing things. We also have to deal with, 0-day vulnerabilities inside your network too, right? So my actual answer to his question is, or her question, I think it's a girl, yeah. So is you got to, number one, pick a framework, because as we say on the show all the time, this is all layers. Like, you have to do this in layers. There's not one thing that you can do. So I would say holistically, understand a cybersecurity framework and start understanding the different components and different layers and different controls, and start understanding where you need to get better at. And then as you are able to reach like almost full compliance with a certain framework, then you're really going to be in a position where you're protected from 0-day attacks. And we're just not there yet with most people, in my opinion. I think we have a long way to go before people really understand what these frameworks are. I'm going to skip, let me see. I think the next two questions are kind of related, so I'm going to hold those off till the end. We only have about 8-10 minutes left. So
Wow.
Go ahead.
No, I'm saying, wow, time flew.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things here, and I want to move through them quickly. We mentioned on, I believe, last week's show about that the ability for cyber criminals to basically evade your endpoint protection, because the endpoint protection is what a lot of people think is protecting them from things like ransomware. That's today's term for antivirus, if you don't know what endpoint protection is or means. And hackers are basically able to circumvent any detection by doing what's basically a driver-based malware, driver-based attack. And it's designed to, there's really no difference between what I'm hearing in this now and what was basically called a rootkit back in the day, right? Rootkits just basically took vulnerabilities and legitimate drivers on Windows systems and used them to make their malware function. It's the same kind of thing that's going on here, because what the cat and mouse game is cyber criminals figured out that the EDRs trust all these things. So we can just use them in the same way that rootkits were used back 10, 15 years ago. So Intel came out with a confirmation that their Adler Lake BIOS source code was stolen, and what is stolen is they're admitting it's theirs. Adler Lake is the current generation of hardware that's out there right now for Intel chips. So similar to talking about these driver issues, why does this matter that this code is now out in the wild?
Huh. I mean, I don't mean to jump in and be first twice in a row, but it matters anytime source code's leaked into the wild. It is a major, major travesty, because If it's secret and now someone knows it out there, this guy's leaked it all over everywhere. They're going to pour through it. They're going to find vulnerabilities, and probably by the end of this week, there'll be vulnerabilities that'll be written for that source code.
And for something like this too, the concern is, is this a vulnerability, or do they discover a vulnerability that can be patched with a firmware update, or is this a vulnerability that is so ingrained into the hardware itself that there's no going back? And Intel has a history of this. There was vulnerabilities that were found in a lot of their chips going back that just it was a vulnerability that they never even thought of or comprehended being exploited, and then they had generations of chips that had that vulnerability that you couldn't go back.
Yeah, and you have to think this is BIOS, so the operating
can't get any closer.
yeah, the operating system has a root. Well, the BIOS is basically root of root. I mean, if you control the BIOS, you can do anything you want basically on that machine. I mean, we dealt with an attack like almost 10 years ago that they used the BIOS to basically insert themselves, and then no matter what you did, you could even wipe the machine and they could come right back. This is the kind of attack that led to now all the BIOSes are encrypted. It's harder to get into them, blah, blah, blah. This is going to open up all kinds of can of worms like that.
On top of the fact, too, that there may be some generational things in there where it doesn't just impact that particular generation of chip. There may have been some stuff that they are able to glean from this that affects previous generations of chips, too, because that architecture, goes through and doesn't get replaced every time.
Yeah.
And in case anyone's not aware, they change generations roughly every 8-9 months usually. So, and we're in Gen 11, 12 now.
12. Yeah.
There's probably a lot of reused code because we all know it's easier to reuse code than write it all from scratch every time.
Andre, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say this isn't even a headache only for Intel. There's also finding integrations with Lenovo's secure suite services, their cloud services. So this is something now Lenovo has to think, okay, can they get in through my avenue now?
Mm-hmm. Yep, 100%. That all these issues where we see hardware vendors and software vendors where their code gets breached, then we have to be concerned with cyber supply chain attacks like we did with SolarWinds and Kaseya and all those. So now we have guys. We've talked about ransomware as a service, right? Where we kind of highlighted the fact that these cyber criminals are specializing in getting into your network. And then there's guys that specialize in deploying the ransomware and handling the negotiations, and it's all handled by different companies, if you would. And now we're seeing phishing as a service. And this caffeine service lets anyone launch a massive scaled Microsoft 365 phishing attack. So what the hell is this? I mean, and why isn't this something that we can shut down very quickly?
All right. Well, I didn't want to be the first to jump out again, but it goes back to, it's not literally, it's like the ransomware as a service. Ransomware as a service is you don't have to be an expert. You just pay for the service. They do the heavy lifting. This is basically phishing as a service. The crazy thing, most of these things target the West, if you will, United States, Europe. This one is targeting these phishing attacks that you can pay for. They have like a basic and a pro and a premium plan. Actually target Russia and Chinese addresses. So that's also very interesting. But just the whole idea of a phishing as a service where they can just pay a certain amount a month, all the heavy lifting's done. All you have to do is be evil and then have the money, and then boom, they do everything else for you. Quite a development.
Yeah, it's constant contact for cyber criminals.
They've got tiered subscription plans. I mean, the screenshots just look like ordering any other piece of software.
The other scary thing is like these guys are literally set up to evade everything. You know what I mean? Like they're going to keep the email flowing, so they have different things set up so they can't be shut down by IP address. They probably already have phishing email templates. These are the most popular ones that are working and getting people to click on. And they're literally able to go in and just pull in a template to trick you and get you to click on something. And this is, I mean, why we're talking about this and why this is so important, because what it used to take to set something like this up at this level was very, very difficult.
Yep.
Now it's as easy as going up and signing up for a MailChimp account.
They built it to scale.
Yeah,
They did. And some of the features of the service, the one that caught my attention the most is IP block listing,
right.
Which allows the attackers, you can block out certain people, you can block out geocodes, and that can really help you evade detection when people are looking into how this happened. We mentioned that on one of our podcasts, I think it was a couple months ago, how there was a whole service that was doing this, and you could actually list people that had clicked on a link, and then everybody else was block list. So it was allow list only into the phishing thing. This seems to have some features very similar to that. So it's looking pretty sophisticated.
Yeah, but I mean, to me, this is something that the authorities should be able to shut down very quickly. I mean, to figure out where this is all coming from and just kill it, and maybe kill their website 5 or 6 times, and then it's just like, all right, this is just not worth it. So hopefully, but we'll see. It depends where they're operating out of and how good the local authorities will cooperate. So seems like Russian hackers decided to set their sights on some U.S. airport websites recently. We'll talk about this briefly, and then we'll kind of wrap up with these 3 or 4 questions that I have left over. They're kind of all related. Mm-hmm. But you guys kind of said this is a little bit of a nothing burger. And as we're going through the show, I'm kind of thinking, well, it's kind of not. Yes, it is a nothing burger in the sense that, like, there was no ransomware deployed. It basically, what it tantamounted to at the end of the day was their websites were down for a little while.
Maybe
right?
Overblown is a better word. I mean, some of the ways the media outlets were talking about this made it look like there was a huge attack coming from Russia on American airlines, right. But it was really just the websites. But it's still serious. But
it's serious in the sense that, number one, what they did was they did a denial of service attack, which basically means they send a bunch of web traffic towards your servers and it overloads them, and then they can't load web pages. A couple of things that come to mind with that. A lot of times DDoS attacks are kind of like, the tail wagging the dog type of thing, where they're actually doing something else. Mm-hmm. And they just, get everyone's attention over on the DDoS attack while they're doing something else. I would imagine that a lot of people use airport websites to, learn if flights are, I'm sure that you can link to flight, like I know in the Philadelphia website, PHL, you can see all the flight statuses from their website. You don't have to go, anywhere else. And obviously, if you want to find parking or you want to know how to pick somebody up at that airport, you're probably going to these websites. My concern is that, they have done this. Can they, where do you need to be concerned, especially as a business owner? When you have a publicly facing website, it's not out of the question that they use your website to deploy malware, right? If they can, embed some kind of code in there that then loads up, an ad or something that somebody clicks on that then, causes the visitors of those websites to have a problem with adware or malware. That's the concern here. Like you need to have cybersecurity on your website. You just can't have some web designer throw up a website and never think about the security side of things. A lot of times businesses just focus on updating their website or getting, information on the blog, but they don't think about securing from a standpoint of who's updating the website on the back end to make sure there's no, vulnerabilities and things like that. And then who's monitoring that website to make sure there's nothing malicious in the code that could potentially be infecting somebody else. The concern for you is, as a business owner, you can get sued if that happens. Right? If I get malware or ransomware from your website or click on something on your website that causes me to have a bad day, I might be calling my lawyer saying, hey, I went to this website and got this, and how many other people were involved. And now you're dealing with a class action lawsuit. So that's where my head goes when I see this stuff. I don't know if you guys want to spend a couple minutes throwing your opinions in.
Yeah, I think definitely they were showing their cards that, hey, we are capable of doing this. And, what do terrorist organizations want to do? They want to cause fear. So this was just something where the headlines were going, and it's kind of like, everybody's thinking, oh my gosh, if they can get this, what else can they do within the airport and the airplanes?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, y'all both made some great points. I mean, there is some concern. Is this, hey, look over here while we are actually getting into your real network and we're going to make planes hit each other or something like that. You know what I mean? But this whole denial of service, I know it's been known for quite a while that there are several huge botnets that are basically or led by, Russian or Russian influenced states. They brought down several, websites of governments that have been involved in issues with them over the last, 5-10 years. So, most likely it's a psyop, like what Reggie was just talking about. I mean, what Andre was saying, that basically, it gets in your head and you're like, oh, wow, they brought them all down. It makes the headlines. What else can they do to us? That's what I'm leaning towards.
Mine's good.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the moral of the show today is like, pay attention to your publicly facing things, your devices, your exchange servers, your websites. Like, this stuff matters as well. I guarantee you that more than 60-70% of the businesses out there don't even think twice that their website could become a point of attack for, a cyber criminal. So good stuff, guys. Thanks for all the input. Let's wrap up with, we got 3 more questions here. They're kind of along the same lines. So Eric asks, are there any tips for non-tech people to protect themselves from hackers? And then behind that, similarly, is there a good checklist to help the average individual get themselves protected who don't really understand what the potential dangers are out there? Similar type questions. So you guys want to take a shot at this?
I mean, I think the ideal answer is you probably want to engage with somebody who knows this stuff. I mean, there are some things, within IT support that I think definitely can fall under a DIY type category where you can get away with doing some stuff yourself. I think cybersecurity is a completely different ballgame. I mean, even the people that are in this field are constantly learning and having to keep up with things on a daily basis. I mean, the cybersecurity world today is different than it was 6 months ago, different than it was 2 years ago. So it's something you really have to constantly keep up with, and having layers. I mean, if there was, that one thing, which, we've talked about is not a silver bullet. It's not an easy button. Make sure you have MFA on everything possible. But my real advice is, you need to engage with an expert to keep track of this stuff. This stuff happens every single day.
That actually brings up a great point, Ryan. We could spend a whole show talking about how individuals can protect themselves. And actually we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
We might have a guest on next week. I don't know. If we don't, we could cover that, like from an individual standpoint,
because individuals are tricky. I mean, there's not that many resources out there for them, unfortunately.
Well, like I look at somebody like Julie, right? And I don't know Julie that well, but I gotta feel like this person is not getting trained in their workplace for this stuff if they're asking this type of question, because that's where I would start. I would start with, you should be getting security and awareness training, right? And if you're not getting it at work, sorry, shameless plug here, but watch our podcast, right? Because we're telling you every single week what you need to do to protect yourself at both a business level, high level, and then down to the individual level. Individuals need to be aware of phishing, smishing, which is text message, phishing attacks, how things can come in through social media. Like, you need to understand like how you could potentially be attacked by a cyber criminal. And there's a lot of different ways. And then like when you get these text messages, when you get these phishing emails, what do you do with them? How do you respond to them? How do you know if it's legitimately from your friend or not? That's what security and awareness training will get you. It'll get you smart on this stuff, but so will listening to this podcast. I mean, we've been doing this for at least 2 years, right, Andre? I mean, we have 2 years of every single week of coming to you with tips and things that you need to do. So share our podcast, get the word out, and this is why we do this podcast exactly for people like Julie, so that they understand the risks of what cyber criminals are doing out there.
Well, and I also think where she's coming from is your average individual that's not on a company-owned device at a company, getting full stack cybersecurity, getting training from a company. And, it's a really big hole right now. This whole, sometimes I call it residential cybersecurity, but this whole market out there, they're somewhat protected just because they're like behind a small wall in a war. An individual you're not going to get $10 million from if you hack them, maybe 500. So the criminals are going where the money is. But as that gets harder and harder, you're going to see more automation, more ransomware as a service, phishing as a service, and it's going to move down towards those basically targets where they can get $500 or $1,000. And it's a huge need right now. Somebody listens to our podcast needs to start a residential cybersecurity company where you just charge a certain amount, and it's all automated so you can make money and then they can stay safe.
Not me.
But the bigger concern for me is like, I have young kids, and I'm very vocal that my kids will not have devices until they're well into their teens, because I look at these devices as no different than putting a kid behind a car. You have to train kids on these cyber risks as well. I know too many kids that have phones that are in elementary school, middle school, high school, and they get one of these text messages and they just click on it because they're curious. Like, what happens if I do this? And boom, their phone's bricked. They have ransomware. And that's the concern that I have, is that like, we're not educating the adults who are giving these devices to the kids. And now we have a whole slew of kids that are going to have to be retrained on these devices when they get in the corporate world or when they get older and they actually have things like credit scores to worry about or bank accounts with money in them. That's where this starts to become a problem, because technology use is so ingrained in you to do it a certain way for a decade before you get to that age. If you're giving your kid a device at 8 years old, and then by the time they're 18, they have horrible cyber hygiene, they're going to get hacked. And that's where we're getting to. And then we're going to have a whole, we're as cyber defenders, when they get jobs and they go in the corporate world, we got to unwind 10 years of all of that. So that's, that's another piece of this, because we haven't had to unwind bad cyber hygiene from a lot of the people that we're dealing with today, just because of their age and how long technology's been in their lives. We're starting to get to the group of people where technology has always been in their lives. So, all right. So last one, we'll spend like 30 seconds on it. How do I know if I'm under attack as a non-tech person? Is there a first sign that we should notice before it gets worse?
I mean, I would just say, as a rule, never trust, always verify. So always be on the lookout for things that may not be what they seem.
Wow. And go ahead.
Yeah. So how do I know if I'm under attack? Typically, if your computer's acting a little differently, you're trying to open up a Word document and all you're seeing is X's and O's, then that could be some type of sign. Or if you just get a file, a notepad that says, read me ransomware, that's also your indication that you have an issue.
Yeah, weird stuff going on with your computer. Also, maybe an exponential growth in like messages or SMS messages coming your way. Also, people replying back to you like, "Hey, why'd you send me that message?" And you didn't send it, and you look in your sent mailbox and nothing's there. Which, by the way, if you do get a message like that, I think that you should, like, it's a message from a friend that's obviously malicious, pick up the phone and call them. If you reply back, there's going to be some kind of filter in there. It's going to make your email deleted. So pick up the phone and call that person and let them know what's going on. Yes.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. Weird stuff with your computer, weird stuff with your email. So I would say check your sent items folder, Make sure you don't have any weird messages in there that maybe you didn't send. That's an indicator of business email compromise or email compromise. And then look at your rules in your email. Make sure you don't have any weird rules that are set up to delete certain emails or forward them to a different place. Business email compromise is a pretty big deal when it comes to that. And that's usually a precursor to something like a ransomware attack. You're going to know when you have a ransomware attack. They're not hiding that. They're coming right out and telling you that they got you. And plus, you won't be able to open any files on your computer. So hope that helped, Chelsea. Thanks, everyone. Great show. Hour. Wow. Hope everybody got a lot out of this, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
All right.